In July 1985, Henk Haazen was the third engineer on the crew of the Greenpeace ship, the Rainbow Warrior. A long-time Greenpeace activist, Henk has 29 years of professional sailing experience and is still involved with environmental protests. Originally from the Netherlands, Henk is now based on Waiheke Island. He continues to work on boats involved in environmental protest action and conservation. Thank you very much for coming in today, Henk.
Oh, you're welcome.
So, take me back to the night of July 10th, 1985. What were you doing just before the explosion?
Well, we were actually not on board that night,
right.
which was a good thing. We went to see my partner's family. We stayed there for the evening, and just to get off the ship for an evening.
Nice.
And yeah, so we were there during the night, and we got a call at about I think 2 o'clock in the morning from Martini, who told us that the ship had sunk and that they were all outside the police station. And so we went. So that was a big shock for us.
Yeah.
And we went down to see them.
So you were quite shocked when you initially heard about this?
Well,
did it upset you quite a bit?
It was unbelievable, really.
Yeah.
It was right out of the blue, really. We never expected anything like that to happen.
Of course not, yeah.
And
yeah.
I had no idea where it came from.
And when did you first suspect that it was an act of sabotage? Did you know that it was a French operation?
It took a long time, actually.
Right.
Yeah, so initially the police thought that we had done something wrong on the ship, and the ship had an explosion internally, or some gas bottles, or, we're just stupid bunch of hippies, who don't know how to drive a ship or something like that. But anyway, so that was their first approach, and then they sent some divers down. The Navy came down quite soon, and then they saw the explosion went from the outside in. So all the metal plates were bent inside. So that was obvious that it was sabotage, really.
Yeah.
That it was an explosion from the outside, the blast going in. So there was mines being placed.
Oh, wow.
So that changed the whole approach from everybody, including the police. They had a whole, like they were professional throughout, but all of a sudden they realized that it was much bigger than they had thought, and they thought we must have provoked somebody, and we provoked lots of people. Or provoke, get into lots of people's hair. That's our job in some respect. That's Greenpeace's job. But it took a long time before it was actually proven, and it was clear that it was the French who had done this, because that was such an outrageous. People speculated, is it the French, is it this or that? But it's such an outrageous thing to do. Who would do that anyway? It's kind of, or some extremist people who had a hatred for the organization or what we stood for. But so it took quite a while for that to become clear. Like I'm talking like a week, 2 weeks, till it was sort of, then there were some arrests were being made. We were all being interviewed by the police, and it was all very official, and it was very slow. It was like every day there was a new revelation. And I remember sitting we had a big house. We rented a house in Herne Bay.
Oh yes.
And we had a TV there, and the end of the hallway was one of those big old villas. And the TV at the end of the hallway was every night. I was still first line in the news, and every night there was a new sort of element brought out.
Yeah.
And it was like it got more and more unbelievable.
Oh, wow.
More and more like, oh, this is unreal. This is not really happening. And we're in the middle of all this. And but it was first they find there was a bomb on the outside, and then they find they find all this suspicious behavior from a yacht, and then they find this Newman's van, and then these people had false passports, and then they were French agents.
Wow.
It was like
unbelievable.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
So the engine room was obviously a place where you worked often.
Yeah.
How did that make you feel when you learnt that one of the 2 bombs was placed near the engine room, and you could have easily been in that room and been another fatality?
Yeah, it was more than that, actually. So they were placed strategically. So if you want to disable the ship, which is a motor ship, although we're a sail ship as well, but we couldn't go anywhere without that motor. You got to destroy the engine room and the propeller, which they did with both those places of those bombs. But that engine room, actually, that first explosion was directly underneath our cabin, where Bunny and I were staying. And I spoke to one of the police officers afterwards, and I mean, right next to our bed was a hole that's about the size of, you know, like 4 or 5 inches.
Wow.
This steel plate just buckled up, and a piece of steel had flown right through it. That was right next to our bed, and the policeman said, you know, if you had he'd actually been in that cabin, then you wouldn't have walked out of it, because the shock of it, just the shock under when the explosion underneath you would have knocked you out.
Oh wow.
So like, and as I said, we weren't sleeping there, but that's where we would have been. And I think the bit that's so outrageous about it is lots of things, but also there's never any warning given about this whole thing.
No.
You know, it's nothing. You know, it was just a regular ship. We were in port, fully crewed. Plus, there was a party on board, extra people on board. No warning.
No.
You know, so if you're going to do something like that, you want to disable a ship. That's one thing.
Yeah.
But total disregard for life.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So did you ever return to the ship after that event?
Yeah, lots of times. Yeah.
Wow. What was that like for you?
Well, initially, you know, she was alongside the wharf there for a long time. It took, I don't know, I can't remember now. It took him a month or something to get a temporary patch on and then float her up. So we were allowed on the wharf. We were never allowed on the ship because we were part of the investigation. You know, so the police kept a very clean separation. So you're part of the investigation, and then the ship was in the dry dock, the naval dry dock in Devonport.
Right.
And it was there for about 5 weeks, and 5 or 6 weeks, and all the time under police. We were never allowed on board. We were allowed once to sort of have a look at the state of the engines, and then because it was still all considered as evidence, and that could be tampered with.
Yes.
So you know, we didn't get the ship back until 2 or 3 months later, after the event, and so then the police investigation was finished, and she was floating, and then we got possession of her again. So. Yeah, and then we had her tied up alongside for about a year and a half, 2 years at downtown, where all the flash yachts are now, and just to figuring out what to do with her. You know, so
of course.
So we had to look after the ship, and we cleaned it all up, and there was the big discussion if we were going to restore her or get another ship or scuttle her. Yeah. And if it was worth restoring or not. So.
So how does this event continue to impact on your life 30 years on?
Well, here I am, isn't it? You know, so it has some impact.
Yeah, of course.
It's a story that doesn't go away.
No.
And for me, and I think for anyway, I can only speak for myself. It's a shedding of innocence in a way. You know, because we were all, the crew was just, you know, you might say they were normal people. You know, like you and I, like. We're just trying to do the right thing.
Of course.
We happen to be in a position that we're fortunate enough to be on a ship and selected as a crew and be able to do this work. Yeah. But really, very normal people, nothing like hardcore or fanatic, or just, I consider myself like that, pretty regular guy, really. Yeah. And this happened to be, end up in that role. And also a bit naive, you know. Yeah. But that story brought out that well, lying is one word of putting it. You know, how a story gets twisted in the media. Yes. You know, and it becomes a political football, and all the French journalists, for instance, who came on board, they said, oh, well, there was a warning given, and they were convinced because that was how it was reported in France. Yeah. In all the major newspapers, as the story, as some of these books that were written there as well, saying, oh yeah, we're giving a warning, and it was a fair, you know, blah blah blah, and these were extremists, and Greenpeace, you know, blah blah. They were trying to, they're saying we're doing it out of protecting our national interest, but they didn't. So how that whole story gets twisted, and then also how political pressure gets put back onto New Zealand. Of course. A year and a half, 2 years later, saying, "Oh, they're going to put a trade embargo on New Zealand as a country, if you don't let these people who have a conviction, and if you don't let them go after a year, they have a 10-year conviction. They only served a year, you know. Yeah. These are the guys who are convicted of murder, you know, manslaughter. Well, thank you very much for coming in today, Henk, and sharing these experiences with us. We really appreciate it. Okay. Good luck with that. Thank you.